Gentlemen, welcome to the AGRF 2021. The theme is pathways to resilient foods, to recovery and resilient food systems. This is the first day of the AGRF 2021 summit. We had a pre-summit yesterday with over 250 speakers and 31 sessions. So we are excited to see this session take place. On the panel today, we are joined by Professor Hamadi Boga of the Ministry of Agriculture. We have Dr. Fadel Ndiaye, the Vice President, AGRA, Jennifer Bunn, Managing Acting Director, AGRF, and online we are joined by Professor Kevin Rama of the African Development Bank. The theme of this press briefing is framing for the AGRF 2021 summit with a focus on the African Agriculture Status Report. Welcome to the session. Online, we have 22 media houses and we're expecting about 14 people in the room. Fortunately, they've gone to be tested, but we will just kick off with the people in the room. So to start us off, Jennifer, please give us a little bit of a framing to the AGRF 2021 Summit theme, the focus, and how it fits into the UN Food System Summit. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Catherine. So the theme for this year is Pathways Towards Recovery and Resilient Food Systems. And we selected this topic, of course, for various reasons. At the AGRF, we've always been the platform where stakeholders from across the ecosystem gather to discuss how are we going to drive agriculture and food systems transformation. But this is a special year. It's our second year in the COVID pandemic, which really has amplified many of the challenges that we already have in our food systems, and therefore also driving us towards the urgency of finding solutions towards 2030. But this is also the year of the UN Food System Summits, where we will be discussing food systems transformation as well at the end of September. So the AGRF is well positioned to be the stepping stone and elevate the coordinated African voice in terms of priorities towards transformation, to complement this with commitments from partners across the ecosystem, being it private sector, development partners, farmer organizations, but also to discuss accountability. So with that mindset, that is how we actually got to the team, and that is the main focus and the aim of the AGRF Summit this week. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. We'll move to Professor Boga. Kenya was selected as the host for this year's summit. Could you please tell us why Kenya and what we can expect from Kenya's leadership post-AGRF?
Thank you very much, everyone. We are happy to host the AGRF this year, 2021, under these conditions of COVID, which is the second year running that we are, the AGRF is being hosted under the COVID pandemic situation. We successfully hosted the AGRF in 2016. And I think out of the lessons from there, it was easy when the COVID situation complicated the arrangements, Nairobi being a hub and Kenya being a leader in the African continent around the issues that are being discussed. We happily, the Cabinet, His Excellency the President, and the Ministry of Agriculture agreed to host this AGRF this year because as a hub, Nairobi has the infrastructure to support the conference. And initially we wanted to host around 500 delegates physically, but because of the fourth wave, we adjusted that so that we are now hosting around 150 and the rest are attending virtually. We had hoped to host the heads of state, but all the heads of state now will appear virtually. We have the ecosystem to support the virtual conference, and I'm sure despite all the constraints that are brought by this pandemic, we are still able to have a honest, robust conversation about the food systems in the run-up to the UN Food System Summit. And I'm sure the resolutions that will be made here will contribute to improving our own systems, but also contribute to the debates during the forthcoming UN Food System Summit, which is a few weeks away. And Kenya will continue to lead. As you know, we have focused on 100% food nutrition security in the last 4 years. We have developed the agriculture sector transformation and growth strategy, which defines the way we want to conduct our agriculture business and the production of food, tackling some of the themes that are being discussed in this conference. And the ideas that will come out of this, of course, will go into improving our execution. We are happy to host the world, because although it's Africa, but the world is here, of private sector, farmers, civil society organization, governments, UN agencies, other development partners. We're happy to host them, and the ideas will, of course, strengthen our own thoughts about how we continue with the food production in the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Boga. And shifting from, you've welcomed the world here, so we are shifting to the UNFSS. And I want to invite Professor Kevin Rama from the African Development Bank. He's one of the 4 technical experts who led on the Africa Agriculture Status Report. This year's report is titled A Decade of Action, Building Sustainable and Resilient Food Systems in Africa. Professor Urama, please tell us about the background on the report and some of the key findings that you got in your research. Welcome.
Okay, thank you very much. And so this year, you've already given us the title of the report. In terms of the background for the report, we set out to identify actionable strategies towards building sustainable and resilient agri-food systems in Africa. And as already alluded to in the beginning of the session, our intention is that we come up with practical recommendations that can also feed into Africa's common position as in the lead up to the UN Food Summit that is coming. So in terms of our approach, we took an integrated approach, a very systemic approach, realizing that food systems everywhere is very complex and multifaceted, especially in Africa. There are multiple actors, there are multiple sectors, there are multiple things, aspects that needs to be put together in a holistic way to better understand how to make it resilient going forward. At the primary level, we think primarily about the smallholder farmers who grow the crops that we eat, and also to the end of also the commercial farmers, the large businesses that are in the sector. Downstream, we also think about the food systems in terms of ranges of informal processors, agri-processors, small and large-scale farming, to big multinationals that play in the field on the continent. Now, the key findings are multiple. Chapter 1 of the report, when you do get it, summarizes the key findings, while chapter 10 summarizes the key actionable recommendations we've made, first for African governments, and second for Pan-African organizations like AU, African Development Bank, AGRF, and the rest of them, but also the private sector and then international development partners who work with Africa. Let me just highlight 2 out of those key findings because of time. The first one is a very good news that Sub-Saharan Africa has registered the most rapid rate of agricultural production growth since the year 2000 of all regions of the world. This is a very good thing for us. Our output expanded by 4.3% compared to 2.7% in the rest of the world. And this is really something that we need to celebrate. Our governments, our stakeholders, our private sector have been doing well in that area. But this output growth has been largely driven by area expansion, basically agricultural extensification, by growing more crops in more pieces of land. And that has sustainability and resilience implications. Over 75% of that reported growth comes from this extensification, while 25% comes from productivity growth. So the challenge for us in Africa is that over the next 10 years, we need to think about how to transition from a resource-dependent agricultural output growth to a productivity-led agricultural output growth. And the next thing comes from there, that this productivity-led agricultural output growth comes from knowledge, it comes from capacity, it comes from technologies, and the kinds of implements we use in agriculture going forward. So we need to try and marry both the agroecological principles to ensure sustainability, but also the modern green revolution technologies, input systems, fertilizer, and so on. We need to bring all those together. Africa has no time to debate which one is better. We need to feed our people. And in order to do that, we need to take care of all those aspects. So it's not an either or. We need to build locally adaptive technologies in Africa, the local knowledge, local technologies, local institutions to be able to really do agriculture in a way that will focus on productivity-led growth. And to do this, African governments have one key recommendation that we make for them, which is to increase their spending on agricultural research, development, and extension. To honor the Maputo Declaration, which they agreed to put 10% of budget to the agricultural sector. And this is the main point that the report is really coming at. So that would depend less on help from outside, but that Africa will take a lead in terms of an Africa-led agricultural productivity growth on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kevin, and for your findings. Let me take it to Dr. Fadel Ndiame. Bringing this to context, what does this mean for smallholder farmers in the continent?
Thank you, Kathy. I think building on what my predecessor said, I think firstly, the timing of this discussion compel us really to think about action, but with a sense of urgency. It's very clear that we have 10 years, 10 harvesting seasons remaining before to meet the SDGs. Now, the implication is, even though we have had, and Professor Kevin just mentioned it now, as a continent, we have made a lot of progress in increasing production, but to put it plainly, we have done it the wrong way. It's not sustainable. We expanded area. What is required is a more sustainable, more productivity-driven approach, which requires a new way of thinking about our performance, not only in terms of agriculture, but also in terms of food system, which speaks to the whole value chain from production to processing to consumption, not only producing more, producing better food, high quality and affordable food. I think it puts the conversation in a new format of really making progress on all the metrics of the SDG: productivity, nutrition, employment, and sustainability. Now, the practical implication for smallholder farmers is they need to have access to knowledge about agricultural practices, but also about the natural resource base on which those practices take place. And the idea is to be able to know exactly what the soil required to enable you to produce without really deteriorating your soil. That's required technology. I mean, digital is going to be very important. And I think one of the lessons that COVID taught us is, despite the progress that we have all made, all the gain can be reversed because of dysfunctionality of the supply chain. Therefore, you need significant innovation from a technical point of view, from an institutional point of view, but also from a policy point of view, to make sure that we are able to meet those objectives. For smallholder farmers, I think the opportunity is African government, to the point that Kevin, and I'm glad that the PS is here, and he's a scientist himself, really have to walk the talk and meet the commitment of rededicating themselves to supporting agriculture, especially investing in research, extension, and making sure that adapted, up-to-date knowledge is available and accessible to smallholder farmers. In addition, we will need significant investment in infrastructure, in irrigation, in making sure that there is a proper management of resources, in addition to strengthening the supply chain and the value chain to make sure that we have the lucrative market accessible that enable producers, but also consumers to win. So it's a completely game-changing approach to food system, which require a lot of cooperation between government and the private sector, between smallholder farmer, large-scale farmer. This require a coalition approach. And this is why AGRF is such an important place, because this is the platform where all these partners come together to agree on the priorities, showcase what is working, but also what is not working, and make sure that we recommit ourselves to do the right thing in the next 10 years.
Thank you, Dr. Fadel. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of the first session of the brief. I'd now like to invite members of the press for any questions to any of our panelists. If you'd like to speak and ask a question, please introduce yourself, direct the question to the panelist you'd like to answer. We have a mic on this side, so please walk to that mic if you have any questions. I'm also fielding for questions from the chat. Yeah.
It was all very clear.
It was all very clear. I mean,
Because we don't have excellent questions.
yeah.
Tell us about some of the innovative approach that Kenya have taken, especially around the management of COVID-19, and how that can be leveraged in order to deal with this issue of food system.
Yeah, I think around the question of COVID-19, when the issues of COVID started gathering and the lockdowns started to happen, we realized that for Kenya, the biggest problem was going to be how people will access food. So what we did, and especially the urban settlements, where majority of the low-income earners reside, doing day jobs, how they were going to access food. But also areas where there are food deficits, we were worried about that. So what we did was, of course, worked with the different organizations, including development partners, including the private sector, including farmer organizations, including our counties, to look at the availability of food across the country, how that food could be accessed, and how that food could be distributed without interference from the lockdowns. And to enable us to do this, we created a food security war room, which sort of brought everybody on the table on a weekly basis to discuss any challenges. And together we developed guidelines that enabled us to operate smoothly. And we also mapped the urban poor who had been laid off because of the lockdowns. And especially in the urban settlements, we instituted a cash transfer system so that on a weekly basis, they were getting some money through cash transfer, through mobile M-Pesa. And that way, we have been monitoring continuously. Now, the food security war room has become a permanent feature of the ministry. The meetings are bi-weekly because we know the pandemic is still around, but also because we know there are other threats. I think around the same time of the pandemic, we were also facing a locust invasion. So we were also focusing on that threat also at the same time, reporting on the fight against the desert locust so that we could assure that food is accessible, food can be distributed, processing goes on, and that the prices are stable. And we also were monitoring imports from the region and also monitoring food stocks globally, especially for commodities like rice and wheat, where we have a deficit. And so we were constantly updating our food balances to make sure that everything went smooth. I think for the last 2 years, all the prices of the commodities have remained stable, and most of our interventions have been effective. And I appreciate the collaboration from all stakeholders, and we'll continue to collaborate going forward.
Thank you very much, Professor Boga. We have a question from the chat from Joseph. This is to you, Professor Rama. How is the shock from COVID-19? How is the shock from COVID-19 caused to our food systems in Africa going to impact the efforts to meet the SDG 0 on zero hunger?
Okay, thank you very much. That's a very good question. As we could all see, the COVID-19 created a major shock, which in my view is also a major opportunity for us in Africa to rethink how we are doing our agriculture. Because of the lockdowns and the closure of borders and so on, the global food chain was actually disrupted. So it's not even a question of whether governments had the money to buy the food, but actually accessing it. So for me, one of the major impacts we need to harness, and it's coming at a good time for Africa because of the ACFTA as well, is that we need to actually build regional value chains. We need to start thinking of doing what Kenya just talked to us about, be able to take care of our people in emergencies in these kinds of shocks. So that is reshaping the discussion around global food trade quite significantly. I like to always focus on the positive sides of every challenge, because COVID-19, though a major challenge, presents a huge opportunity for us to think differently. Then another one is one of the key things that the report found, which is the fact that the food chain, the food system is so interconnected. We cannot just think about investing in seed systems or in fertilizers without thinking of investing in other aspects of the food system that gets food to the table for the people that we are expecting to feed. So that holistic approach to managing the food system is a key point that came in. And it's also meant that different ministries need to think together and work together so that the infrastructure is creating nerves, road networks, and so on to bring food to market and to the people that need it, and also rural electrification, basically thinking of food systems as a major shift towards inclusive and resilient development pathways. These are two key things I would like to put on the table now because of time. But if you read the report, you will see a lot more that we have come up with.
Thank you, Professor Rama. For you, Dr. Fadel, how do we ensure stakeholders are more coordinated when it comes to building resilient food systems?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as my colleague now, I will always say the question is more important than the answer. Actually, we don't have an alternative than come together, build a platform, cooperate in order to find a way. Just to build on what the PS just said, the way Kenya was able to successfully manage this is to be able to build a platform that brought together public, private sectors, all the stakeholders beyond the usual institutional demarcation to share data and information. And that was the starting point now to start planning action and make targeted intervention that is required, because one size doesn't fit all. And I think that's also what Professor Kevin is referring to. The crisis actually compels us to think differently about the nature of the system. It's a systemic phenomenon, which means we need to understand how the different parts interact. And from that understanding, we can now promote a new type of activity, which is basically built on cooperation. And finally, I want to highlight that the AGRF, from that point of view, is an amazing platform, because you already have issue-based coalition, people coalescing around youth issue, sustainability, nutrition, financing. And this understanding that you will need to 1 + 1 is more than 2, it's 10, because we are cooperating. So that's I think is even more important in order to address the issue of COVID, issue of resilience and sustainability.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing up the coalition within the AGRF, because the next question is for you, Jennifer. Why food systems this year? Why is it so important? And what can we expect to see?
Why is food systems so important? I would like to actually make the same statement that Fadel made, that asking the question is almost answering it. If we really want to achieve our goals of zero hunger, we have no other choice than have a holistic approach, an ecosystem approach when it comes to food security, agriculture, value chains, nutrition, consumption, political environment. It's all in the mix. And what that translates into, once again, is co-creation, alignment, accountability across all the different partners and the stakeholders. And that is something that is reflected even in the way how the AGRF, as the leading conference on agriculture on the continent, is being shaped. A significant partner is the Kenyan government, who has already stated, not just by PS Boga, but also His Excellency, clearly articulated awareness raising on what it takes to transform our food systems and what the role is in of each and every stakeholder. So that's basically the mandate that we have. The AGRF is a platform of over 20 partners who throughout the year work together to align their programs, interventions, and their visions as well, and to shape this whole advocacy platform that engages with thousands of people all over the world who all prioritize the targets and the goals towards zero hunger that we have on this continent. So asking the question is answering it. A, it's critical, B, we're working on it, but C, we have to increase urgency and we have to learn from good examples from others all across the continent. And we have to look at the type of interventions that are scalable. So that is what this conference is about, and that's also what food systems transformation is about.
Thank you, Jennifer. We have a question and we only have, I think this is the last question we'll take because we have only 4 minutes. And this is to you, Professor Boga. So climate change is here, it's on us. How is the government working to help farmers adapt and become more resilient?
I think in our agriculture sector transformation and growth strategy, the issue of resilience to climate, resilient to pandemics, resilient to other shocks is given priority. And the ministry has developed programs together with development partners that are focusing on building resilience. Almost every program now that we develop has a component on resilience. And the focus is especially to make the farmer be supported by a knowledge base about agroclimate. For that, we have Kenya Meteorological Department partnering with CalRO and creating a big data platform, which provides farmers and stakeholders with agro-weather information so that they can plan ahead their farming activities based on the agro-weather information that is available constantly. And at the same time, the big data platform also provides other early warning systems to enable the farmers be warned about impending weather issues that could affect their farming activities. We have also invested a lot in agro-pastoral systems that take cognizance of the fact that weather has become unpredictable. So there's a lot of structures that deal with water harvesting, from water pans to dams to boreholes to hay sheds that are channeled in especially Asal County, but also elsewhere, to support the communities there as they carry out their farming activities. So in the ministry, we have almost like 5 programs, either supported by the ministry itself or by World Bank or by African Development Bank, and basically focusing on these areas And it's not just the ministry. The Ministry of Water also has similar programs. The county governments have similar programs. The Ministry of Devolution through NDMA has similar programs. And recently we have decided to map all these interventions and juxtapose so that we see how they overlap and how they overlay, so that we can see whether we are covering the whole country, and especially the most vulnerable areas. But I think the biggest solution for this, for our farmers and for the actors, is to strengthen the knowledge base. Through that, we are working with the research organizations, especially the CG centers and CALRO and our universities, around solutions that are technology-based, but also knowledge-based, so that we can equip our farmers and the communities with the information they need to adapt to climate change. So it's the whole focus. I don't think going into the future we'll be able to do any agriculture without factoring in the issue of how we cope with the changes in the climate.
Thank you very much, Professor Boga. Last question to you, Dr. Fidel from DEVEX. I have a question for you. The Alliance for Food Sovereignty for Food has called on donors to defund agri and industrial agriculture, as they say it's ineffective and does not support smallholder farmers. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Kathy. And firstly, to acknowledge, again, all questions are important and legitimate. And I think behind that question, we can understand the concerns.
AGRF.
Okay, we understand the concern for forms of agriculture that don't respect nature, that are overly dependent on external input, and that don't respect local knowledge. Now, what I am happy to say is this is not what AGRA does. AGRA's work is based on it's smallholder driven, science-based, partnership-driven, African-led. And the starting point is the smallholder farmers. We start with their own practice and their needs. And as Prof. Boga just mentioned, working with the national research system and the extension system, they are provided with place-specific knowledge and information for them to make their decision. So I think we are at the stage where it's so important to use all the tools at our disposal. I think we understand the political and ideological dimension of that discussion. I think, especially in the context of a food system summit, where we know that when you produce, we have to have the environment and sustainability at heart. But I think in the case we are talking about, we need to increase productivities by combining crop-based genetic gains that came from research. Some of the varieties that our farmers are using date more than 40 years in a context where the climate is changing. So I think it will not be right to deny African smallholder farmers the opportunity to access on science-based, evidence-based option to improve their livelihood. But we need to do it being mindful of the environment. This is where Professor Boga mentioned knowledge. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, agriculture is an art of locality. It's solving concrete problem in concrete locality. And at the basis of that is supporting farmers, institution, government, and private sector to make the right decision. So this is what I can say. I think we welcome all the discussion, but I think we should be driven by science, evidence, and not spend too much time on ideological either or, because the reality is much more complex. We need to combine all the options, but do it with the end in mind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fidel. We have overrun our session, so we are going to close this briefing. Thank you so much to Professor Rama. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you, Dr. Fidel. Professor Boga, we thank you for Kenya's leadership, and we see you tomorrow.
Should have asked that question.
I would.